Hi everyone, today I'm going to show you how I created this zebra wood and epoxy coasters. The first thing I needed to do was cut down the stock to size, using the table saw and the crosscut sled. Once I had everything to the correct length and width, I decided to bring it over to the planer and get it as flat as possible. I wasn't very smart in the beginning and I chased the planer around the table for a minute, then I realized that I should clamp it down. After that, I took Barkeeper's Friend to the casings that I have and cleaned them up as best as I could. By no means is this hard, it's just awfully time consuming. I heard enough stories where if you leave the casings empty, they create air bubbles as the epoxy cures. So I took some time here and filled the casings with hot glue. Now, this was an extremely time consuming process, and I went through, I don't know, 15, 20 sticks of glue while doing this. I highly recommend using epoxy to fill these and let them sit. It's probably faster and the results would look a lot better. Hindsight shows that I should have measured the casings prior to cutting down my stock, so here I had to trim it to the right thickness. All right, for the first layer of epoxy, I just wanted to give it some black base. I didn't want to see all the way through the coasters. So here I'm using some black liquid pigment from Eye Candy Pigments. I love this stuff. It looked amazing. I just messed up on the amount of epoxy, so I had to make a second pour. Um, this is my first time using this mold, so I should get better with practice, you know? Anyway, have I told you how happy I am with this pigment? Look at this stuff. It's beautiful. It's dark, it's deep, and it's really thin, but you can't really tell. If you've watched any of my videos, you already know that I love walrus oil, and this is no different. Furniture finish here. This oil always brings out the grain, and it doesn't disappoint in this project either. Now, no one told me that epoxy was messy or that it got over everywhere, and maybe I just didn't watch enough videos, but here I am scraping off little splash marks that dried on the edge of the form. Again, this is all going to be clear, so I wanted it to be as pristine as possible. Next up is wiping the top with isopropyl alcohol, drop it in the zebra wood. Are you as excited as I am right now? I made this project and I'm just getting hyped just looking at this video. Now, when you put wood into epoxy, the air that's through the pores of the wood will escape. Ask me how I know. Because I didn't seal it correctly. I only put one small layer of varnish on this. I recommend brushing this with epoxy multiple times. And you'll see why in a second. All right, so here I'm putting some weights on and placing the shells. Each one of these has a different design. And then, of course, the epoxy, mix it together, throw it in there. Now you gotta be careful when you use your torch. I got a little close and got a little smoke on that one side. You can actually cause bubbles if you overheat it. And I use tabletop epoxy for this, so I had to do multiple shallow pours, but you can actually get a deep set where you can pour up to 2 inches, and you could probably do this entire thing in one pour. All right, and here's those bubbles that were caused by not properly sealing the wood. No matter what I did, air bubbles kept escaping. But here I am breaking this out of the mold, and what a chore this was. I ended up having to beat it with a mallet, get a chisel, and it's a learning experience. All right, here we are, and look at those bubbles. This is awful. So I tackled it as best as I could by removing epoxy. Started with some 40 grit, then 60, then 80, and 120, and then 220, and just bringing it down and down and down until I removed all those air bubbles that came out of the wood, as again, I improperly sealed it, or I just didn't seal it. And I misplaced the footage of when I initially cut these. I did it on the bandsaw, and my blade just wasn't tight enough. The blade was too thin. I don't know. I got a ton of excuses, but either way, the cuts were not straight. So I stopped after two, and I had to cut the second pair or the other two with the table saw. Just before I put more epoxy on top of the wood, I sealed it multiple times with polyurethane and then sanded it down, got it nice and smooth, and got ready for pouring epoxy. Now this is the fun part, the flood coat. It makes everything super pretty. One thing that I did have an issue with, which you'll see in here in a minute, is I had these horrible drips on the backside. If anybody has recommendations on how to get rid of these drips without having to sand and cut everything like I'm doing in this video right now, please, please, please let me know in the comments. This makes me almost not want to do epoxy work. Um, I guess it's really not that bad, and I'm being a little dramatic, but this was very time consuming, and if I could skip that step, I absolutely would. Here I'm laying out the wet sanding disc, 400, 600, 800, 1000, 1500, 2000. Um, do you need to break it down this far? I don't know. I did, and I'm super happy with the results. It didn't take terribly long. I didn't spend a ton of time on it. Then after that, after all that sanding, I slapped some polish on it and chased it around the table. Again, this process has to be able to be refined. I use these mini clamps to help me hold it in place, and that seemed to work decent enough. And again, like I said, it came out kind of shiny. Thankfully, the tops of the coasters came out even shinier and they look phenomenal at a nice distance. Epoxy is one of those things that you have to do a couple times over before you get it right. And while you can't really see it in this video, I do have a bunch of small air pockets. Maybe in these stills you can see it, but overall, this was a great project.